right, let's do an historical showcase on some of the thinkers that are credited with coming up with this utilitarianism. The person who's probably most associated with utilitarianism is this thinker here, John Stuart Mill. He literally wrote the book on utilitarianism. He published a book called Utilitarianism in 1863. So here's a line from that book. The greatest happiness principle holds that actions are right in the proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. Again, this is one of the advantages of utilitarianism, is that it's very straightforward, it's very commonsensical. It seems like this is how we operate anyway. You could explain it to a 5-year-old. Like, do you like do you like pleasure and happiness? Yeah. How about pain and suffering and death? Do you like those things? No. Okay. Well, then your goal in life should be to try to maximize the good things and minimize the bad ones. So where utilitarianism really perhaps makes its contribution is it's not just about you, it's about all those affected by your actions. So that is where maybe we leave human nature a little bit. So it depends on your view of human nature. If you think of humans as very egoistic and very selfish, kind of a Hobbesian perspective on human nature, then utilitarianism isn't just programmed into us. We need to kind of go over and above our natural programming. Just because humans naturally are a certain way, that doesn't automatically mean that it's morally good, right? Like, we have some darkness in our souls, I would say, and that can get out of hand. And so we might need moral rules, whether they be handed down from on high or the constructs of society. We need these rules to keep us in check, to keep that devil on our shoulder at bay. So here's an updated version of the basic idea contained in Mill's utilitarianism. So this is the central principle for these consequentialists. We'll call it the principle of utility. This is kind of a more modern, updated, contemporary version of what we can find in Mill's writing. And here it is. Principle of utility. An action is morally right. So this isn't a typo. If and only if, that's what that IFF stands for, if and only if it maximizes the expected utility of affected sentient beings and taken collectively as a group. So you have to know, to understand this, you have to know what utility is, and you have to know what sentient beings are. So I said that you're at a moral decision point. What path should you choose? You go with the one that results in the best outcome, the best consequences, in the most happiness or pleasure. So that's what utility is. Utility is happiness and pleasure. And we'll see that it's not just hedonistic pleasures. It's not just pleasures of instant gratification. Like the pleasures of eating junk food or being on a beach at a sort of Club Med-like resort, drinking some kind of umbrella pina colada sort of thing. It's not just that sort of pleasure. It's also what Mill will describe as high pleasures, which can be the pleasures we get from more long-term planning, not so much instant gratification. These sorts of pleasures can be calculative and even intellectual. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And again, this isn't egoism. So you're not just trying to do what's best for you. You have to do what's best for everyone that's affected by your action. Now, who counts as a one? As we'll see in later lectures, for someone like Immanuel Kant, the only people who counts as one of the everyone are rational agents, are other human beings, presuming that there's, that AI is not, does not have aren't rational persons yet, and setting aside aliens or angels or things like that. So it's going to be a human being, but it has to be a human being that's healthy and functioning, so it has to be fully developed. It can't be like an infant or a toddler, and it can't be like an elderly person with severe dementia. It can't be someone with like a brain injury. It has to be someone who still has their wits about them, someone who can reason. But this is going to exclude infants, toddlers, the elderly, people with cognitive deficiencies, and a whole bunch of animals, a bunch of non-human animals. So if you're an animal rights person, you might not want to be a strict Kantian. However, you could be a utilitarian because there's room in this moral framework for animal rights. We have to take into account animals in our decision making, not because they can reason like we do, but because they're sentient. Sentient or sentient, there's different ways to pronounce it. I'll usually say sentient. So a sentient being is a being that can suffer, a being that can experience pain and pleasure. So we're all human beings are sentient beings, but our pets are sentient beings. I mean, it depends on, if you have a pet mosquito, okay, probably not, but like a pet dog or a cat, probably all mammals are sentient. Probably all birds are sentient. Probably all reptiles and amphibians are sentient. Maybe most fish are sentient. And as you kind of go down that evolutionary line, eventually you're going to get to beings that are part of the animal kingdom, but they're things like insects, and then, eventually get down to like bacteria and amoebas and single-celled organisms. So at some point, they just don't have the nervous system. You probably need a nervous system to be sentient. That seems like one of the necessary conditions. So is a squirrel sentient? Yes. Is an orangutan sentient? I always used to say orangutan, like tang, like the drink. But if you look it up, there's no G at the end. That's neither here nor there. A chimpanzee, sentient, yeah. A zebra, yeah. A whale, yeah. A dolphin, yeah. An otter, yeah. A salmon, yeah. A lizard, yeah. A gecko, sure. What about a shark? Yeah. What about plankton? That's the stuff that like whales eat. Probably not. What about coral? Coral seems like a dead rock, but coral's alive. Probably not. This is eventually sort of an empirical question for our colleagues that study non-human animal psychology. But mosquitoes, rocks, water, planets, empty space, these things aren't sentient. So I hope you got an idea of it. And it says here, taken as a group, because we're kind of circling every sentient being affected by our action, and we are tallying up all of the happiness, like all the good things that will happen to all those beings, and all the suffering, and it's like doing a cost-benefit analysis, but we're doing this in terms of morality. And you get pluses for happiness, so if your action makes these sentient beings this much happier, and then it makes these other ones, they suffer this much. You have to weigh all that, and eventually you come up with some calculation, and you go with the one where you get the highest net, right? You add up all the positive utility, which is sometimes measured in hedons, and then you measure all the negative utility, which is sometimes called dolors, related to the Latin root pain, and if you know Spanish, dolores is pains, and so you get all these pluses for all this happiness and pleasure. You get all these minuses for pain, suffering, and death. And then you look at the balance sheet at the end. You look at the net, right? And then you compare, that's one action. Then you do it for all the other potential moral paths you could go. And the one that has the highest happiness quotient, that's the one you go with. It sounds complicated, but it's basically a moral cost-benefit analysis. You look at the pros, you look at the cons, same sort of thinking. All right, this English philosopher who was born a little bit before John Stuart Mill is Jeremy Bentham. And he's actually the godfather of Mill. So he's born in 1748, English thinker, Jeremy Bentham, here's what he has to say about pleasure and pain. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. So it's just kind of an empirical fact about human beings. We just naturally are drawn toward happiness and pleasure, and we are pain and suffering averse. We want to avoid those things. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. So there might be a bit of a naturalistic fallacy here. So you commit the naturalistic fallacy when you assume that something is normatively good or morally good just because it's the way it is. It's just how things are. It's natural. Or in short, if it's natural, then it's good. I mean, there's a lot of Eastern philosophy out there that might say as much, especially maybe kind of a Taoism. If you are Taoist or if you study Taoism, that's one of the central concepts. That's the Tao, is the natural way of the universe. And when we going against that is the height of human folly. So there might be something to that. But, here's an example that might run counter to that. Let's say someone steps on your toe on accident and it really hurts. And in that moment, this rage might boil up, and you might have a violent reaction. You might want to shove the person, like, hey, and I'm like, buddy, ow. And arguably, that's a natural human reaction to someone accidentally stepping on your toe. It freaking hurts. And when you're feeling that pain, you want to lash out. But even though that's a natural reaction, isn't it right to subdue that, to not act on that, to actually go against what's natural? So even if what's natural is often good, is it necessarily good? It's not so clear. So in one of the readings for this part of the class, this line from the Jeremy Bentham reading really stands out. The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So these are questions that you might ask to a Kantian. Look, Kantians, deontologists, many of you say that the bar for being a moral agent, for having rights that shouldn't be violated, is this rationality on par with normal, adult, healthy humans. But that's the wrong bar. That's the wrong standard. Instead of having the capacity to reason, it should be, do you have the capacity to feel pain, to suffer? That the bar should be lower. So the standard's too high for the Kantian. We should treat beings that can feel pain and pleasure. We should factor in that pain and pleasure in our moral decision making. And if you do otherwise, if you discount that and you only factor in beings who reason, then your moral philosophy is going to fall short. It's going to have a coverage problem. You're going to be able to exploit all these non-reasoning beings, and that's not okay, says these utilitarians. Let's look at an important difference between Mill and Bentham. So they're both utilitarians, but they have very different views on pleasure. Very, very different views on pleasure. So consider the following. Consider this difference between what Mill called low pleasures and high pleasures. Low pleasures are more bodily. They are what we might call pleasures of the flesh. And they are the sorts of pleasures that pretty much all animals experience to a certain extent. They're almost instinctual. They're animalistic. Pleasures that you get from satisfying your basic needs. So you're really, really tired, and then you are able to rest or sleep or nap. Think about how good that feels. Or you're starving, you're so hungry or so thirsty, and then you finally get food or drink. Think about how good a sip of water is when you're just dying of thirst, or how good food is after you haven't eaten for a really long time. Compare that to pleasures that probably most animals can't experience, but human beings can. Pleasures that are more mentally stimulating, that are more cognitive. So instead of pleasures of the flesh, these can be pleasures of the mind. So it's not just about basic needs. It's not so much instant gratification. It might be the pleasure of achieving a goal. So maybe you think about maybe you really struggle in math, and you've gotten, like C's in math over and over again. And then you say, this semester, I'm really going to try. I'm really going to apply myself. I'm really going to study. I'm going to get a tutor. I'm going to take this seriously. And then at the end of the term, you get an A+ in the math class, and you feel great. And it's not, so there might be, you feel great in that moment, when you first see your grade for the term, but that memory might stay with you, and that there's something more long-term and sustaining about that. Or it could be, recently I've kind of nerded out and gotten into things I always thought were really nerdy and dorky. So I've been, during the pandemic, I got into chess and crossword puzzles. And those things are mentally stimulating, right? So there is the pleasures of eating and drinking and resting. Those don't really have a cognitive element to them. But things like chess and like a really tough crossword puzzle, like Saturday, Sunday, like New York Times crossword puzzle, they are very, very difficult and challenging, and they're kind of like this mental workout. And so the pleasure you get from doing those sorts of things or playing that sort of game, that's what Mill would count as a high pleasure. And they really can only be enjoyed by humans. Can your dog do a crossword puzzle? Can a dolphin play chess? Maybe. Okay, how about this? Could a gecko play chess? Could a fish? Could a salmon play chess? No, probably not. So the low pleasures, they are often fleeting. They're ephemeral, mercurial, instant gratification, and they often are kind of pedestrian. They're very popular. They're broad. Not everyone likes jazz and chess, but everyone, loves a cold beverage on a hot day or something. Not everyone loves the symphony or the ballet, but most people like a good pop song, let's say. High pleasures, they can be profound, sustaining. You might need a refined palate. You might need to kind of train yourself. You might need to acquire a taste for them. Think about people that really get into coffee or craft beer, right? At first, someone who's new to coffee or beer, they might like like a mochaccino or something that's basically like hot chocolate with caffeine, or they might like a light beer. And then as you refine your palate, you might say, oh, this is way too sweet, way too boring. I want some kind of Italian espresso that to a newcomer might seem too bitter, but I know is actually of high quality and unique and special. Same thing with like kind of a wine snob. They might be able to taste notes of, small little things that someone who's new to the game, a noob, they might have no idea about. So these can be challenging. They can be sophisticated. So what do a few more examples of these kind of challenging, refined, almost high society pleasures versus the pleasures that are more pedestrian and broad. What do you think about pursuing both of these, pursuing one more than the other? So Mozart's Symphony Number 40 is a well-known one. compare that to top 40 music. Or remember that song that was just super popular? It was kind of an earworm that people couldn't get out of their heads, that Baby Shark song. Baby Shark, dark, 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 bum, 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 bum. See, now it's in my head. Maybe it's in your head now, too. Or trashy TV, like a reality show, like a Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
This season on Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
It just sucks it has to be so public. I'm not just a TV show. Like, this is my life.
You'll put me down just to make yourself not look lame.
Moving to Chicago might be my breaking point.
My family was ruined! Lara!
Compared to an episode of Masterpiece Theater. When I was a kid, that was like the boring TV, that, like your parents would watch. I'd just want to watch like some Saturday morning cartoons. So a show like Downton Abbey has won all of these awards. It's critically acclaimed, but it can be hard to start. You have to kind of get into it, and it might not be instantly gratifying.
I have a clarity of vision that allows me to resist a housemaid's trap of sentimentality.
Your enthusiasm is getting the better of your manners.
Can't we stop this beastly row?
How I wish we could.
Because I'm so sorry.
Thomas, on his left side.
Give me the napkins.
I'll call the ambulance. Keep him warm. Take my coat.
What is it?
His ulcer has burst.
What? Will he be all right?
We must get him to hospital as quickly as we can.
I'm here, darling. Don't worry, I'm here.
If this is it, just know I have loved you very, very much.
This isn't it, darling. We won't let this be it.
Here's some water.
No water. Just keep him steady until the ambulance arrives.
Like kind of like like a summer blockbuster, like a Marvel Universe, Harry Potter, Star Wars type of movie might grab you with some big action scene from the get-go. And what about film? What about a superhero movie that made tons of money, that wasn't particularly well received by the critics, kind of panned by the critics, maybe kind of like, some of the MCU movies, the Marvel movies, they actually, in my opinion, they do a pretty good job of making a lot of money, being very popular, but also can be, not all of them, but can be pretty well done. Some of them, the first Iron Man movie, or some of the Avengers movies, or some of the Captain America ones, they can kind of have a foot in both of these camps. But, unfortunately, some of the DC movies, they might make a bunch of money, but the critics tear them apart. And even the audience members might say this, I had to go see it, I paid the ticket, or I rented it at home, but it wasn't particularly good. So like, here's an example. Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Next time they shine your light in the sky, don't go to it. The bat is dead. Bury it. Consider this mercy.
Tell me. Do you bleed? You will.
I remember being really excited about that. Like, wow, it's like, it's not, Batman is awesome, Superman's awesome, what? Put them together. So there's a fallacy known as the fallacy of composition, where just because things individually have a certain property, it doesn't mean that as a group or collectively that they will still have that property. And this might be an example of that. Individually, like a Batman movie can be awesome, or an individual Superman movie can be awesome. you would think you put them together, it's gonna be twice as awesome. But then this one just kind of fell flat. Sorry, DC. Now compare that to a movie like, so here are a couple. Here, Roma and Drive My Car. There's a lot of you probably haven't even heard of these movies. So they're both foreign films, or whatever. There's a new name for that. International film, I think, is a newer term. It's messing with terms and euphemisms. I have another lecture about that. But setting that aside, okay. So Roma, it was nominated for Best Picture the year it came out, but it's a very challenging movie. So it has a lot of strikes against it for the everyday moviegoer. Number one, it's long, right? So any movie that's over 2.5 hours, that's going to be a challenge. Number two, it's in black and white, the whole movie. So that is going to be boring to a lot of audience member. And number three, it's in another language. So that's going to be reading subtitles, and that's going to be challenging for a lot of people. But if you can get past some of those, maybe even enjoy some of them, you might have to kind of be into the cinema. To speaking of euphemisms, I think I was watching this. I think it was Jerry Seinfeld's interesting talk show, the Comedians in Cars show, and he was talking to maybe Will Ferrell or something, and they were talking about all these names. So there's movie, there's film, and there's cinema, and how cinema. I went to the cinema, and I enjoy cinema. It sounds very art housey, very high society, instead of going to see a movie and then film is kind of in the middle. So Roma is like fine cinema. But I recommend it. Really, really powerful movie, kind of depicting Mexico in this certain era a few decades ago, and has a lot of themes and complex. And then Drive My Car, another one that a lot of you probably haven't heard of, but it was also nominated for Best Picture not too long ago. This is also very long. It's also a foreign film. It's in Japanese, and it's kind of challenging to kind of get into it. But once you do, the argument is you're kind of enjoying the finer things in life. And it's like the highs of these high pleasures are something that we should relish.
僕たちは確かに僕が一番恐れていたのは音を失うことだった。
今回は私たちの決まりでドライバーを用意します。
というと、彼女です。
渡美咲です。
僕はまだドライバーを君に頼むことに同意してない。
私が若い女だからですか
？1ヶ月半の稽古と2週間の本番です。
ずるい人だ。
拜托。
そこまで。失礼。君はどうして広島に？
実家の裏が山なんです。大雨で地滑りが起きて、母はその事故で亡くなったんです。
お父さんって素敵じゃないですか、とても。
君はこう考えてる。僕たちは同じ悲しみを共有してる。同じ女を愛したから。僕の人生と愛はどうしたらいい？
生きていくほかないの。
私の方がおじさんよりずっと不幸かもしれない。それでも私はやけなんか起こさない。だから今毎日とても楽しいです。
You know, a horse can't enjoy these movies. You know, your dog can't enjoy these things. They just don't have the nervous system for it. And so for someone like Mill, you've really wasted your life. You've really wasted your life if you don't enjoy these high pleasures. If you go your whole life and experience few to no high pleasures, you've wasted your life. Now, for someone like Bentham, he thinks that this is a bit snobbish, and that who are these holier than thou, sanctimonious philosophers from their ivory tower, kind of looking down with their noses turned up to the average Joe, average person on the street, and kind of criticizing them for what they like. So for Bentham, you like what you like, and that's okay. If you try these challenging things and they're not for you, that's fine. So if you want to be a couch potato and watch junk trash TV all day and eat junk food, that's your prerogative, and there should be no judgment from anyone who says that they're morally superior. So there's that saying, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and Bentham would be on board with that, except not just for beauty, but for pleasure preference. So you like what you like, and that's fine. And who is Mill to say that you've wasted your life? So you can pause the video and ask yourself, what do you think? Is it okay to go your whole life and just listen to generic pop music, watch reality TV, drink cheap beer, play checkers, let's say, instead of chess, listen to, like I said, top four, like just generic pop music, as opposed to something kind of challenging and different, and sophisticated. Maybe like jazz would be an example of that. Or, never taking a class like this, never thinking philosophically and just kind of having mundane thoughts and not pushing yourself or asking probing questions. So if you live your whole life on this side and you rarely, if ever, dabble over here, have you wasted your humanity? Mill is on record as saying yes, and Bentham would disagree. He would say, no, that is overly critical. So for Bentham, all that matters is maximizing the quantity of pleasure. For Mill, it's not just about the quantity, it's also about the quality. So quality is the kind of pleasure. So you need to factor in that there are low and high pleasures, and you need both. So a lot of students get confused and they say, I get it. Bentham is team low pleasure and Mill is team high pleasure. And that is incorrect. Mill is not just okay with you pursuing low pleasures. A good life is going to be filled with many, many low pleasures. It just can't, the rule is it can't be exclusively low pleasures. You need both. I mean, of course you're going to get low pleasures just from satisfying your basic needs. So it wouldn't make sense. How could you have a life without low pleasures? That wouldn't make any sense. So Mill would say you need both. And students say, I get it. Bentham himself was a low pleasure man and he just ignored high pleasures. No, that's probably incorrect. He was a philosopher, so he enjoyed thinking philosophically, and he was a wealthy English person in the 18th century, and so he probably enjoyed the finer things in life. It's not that he personally was a low pleasure man. He just was okay if you want that. He would say it is the height of elitism and snobbery for anyone to say otherwise. So for Mill, you need low pleasures and high pleasures. And for Mill, high pleasures, it's not just more pleasure. So it's not just quantity, it's a different in kind. It's apples and oranges. High pleasures are objectively better. That's what Mill will say. And there's a line in his writings that serves to back this up. And the quote goes like this: "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." So think about it. If you could push a button right now and you would transform into a pig, the happiest hog, let's say, that ever lived. So you get to eat all day, you get the cushiest of pigsties, you get to roll around in the mud, you get your choice of mate, you get to bask in the sun, and you get to live out a very long pig life. Would you choose that life or the life of a human being that is dissatisfied? So it's not that you are suffering like crazy every day. Your life isn't that great, so you've got some anxiety, you've got some depression, you don't have the best circumstances, maybe you're kind of like living on the street half the time. You have some friends, but not many. Your relationships aren't that good, but you're still a human being. So which would you choose? Most people would still choose the life of a human being. Or if you could pick the life of like a tortured genius. So this is supposed to be Socrates dissatisfied. So you could be like one of those rock stars who's a mega genius, but like they're always teetering on kind of being suicidal, so like a Kurt Cobain or like a Chris Cornell, or even someone from the painting world, like a Vincent van Gogh, one of the best painters ever, but had some mental issues and ended up with the severing part of the ear. So you are a genius, and you're always just kind of teetering on the brink of just being completely miserable. So you could have that life. Or you could be someone with a super low IQ. So maybe someone who had got in a car accident, you have a brain injury, and you're not independent. You can communicate but barely. You know, you have to live in a facility where you get help. You know, all your needs are met, you know, so let's say your parents are wealthy and your facility is as nice as it gets. So, you know, this is the analog to the pig's life. You know, so you get a great room and you get you have a great phone and computer, and there's other people in the facility that you're kind of friends with, you know, but there's like a chessboard in the rec room, but it never gets used because people don't really understand how to use it. And you're just kind of doing checkers and you sort of get it, but not really. So would you rather be the tortured genius, or would you rather be the person with the brain injury? Both human beings, but you know, the slower person doesn't have the mental capacity to enjoy, you know, those finer things in life. Well, most people would rather be the tortured genius. So isn't that proof, someone like Mill would say, that he's right, that these high pleasures are objectively better? And if that's the case, then we ought to pursue them. And if we don't, we've wasted our lives. That's what Mill would say. And he would continue and he would say, you know, Bentham, you are defending rubes and Philistines. So those are fancy word. Well, rube isn't that fancy, but Philistine is, you know, people who are intentionally unsophisticated, or they are, and they don't know what they're missing. You know, it's a disrespect to your humanity. That's what someone like Mill would say. That's all I have for you. That was a lot of fun. So, as always, thanks for hanging out with me.